Today we're going to touch on each of the biggest Space Marine chapters and talk about what 9th edition might mean for them. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we've been talking about the 9th edition news and developments as they've been coming out. The game's changing in all sorts of different ways. We're getting a lot more of a clear picture about what's actually going to be happening with 9th now. We have the core rules, and we also have the points changes to the vast majority of the Space Marine units. With this in mind, I thought we'd put some of it together and talk about how certain Space Marine chapters might be faring in the new edition. We're going to go through each of the core Space Marine chapters from the main book: Blood Angels, Dark Angels, Space Wolves, Deathwatch and Grey Knights, a few Space Marine Successor Chapters, and just talk a bit about how 9th might affect them based on their chapter tactics, doctrines, unit changes, and any other interesting factors that I thought were worth highlighting. I'm sure this isn't going to be a complete list, so if you have any other insights on your chosen chapter, then please let us know down in the comments for any other rules changes that are going to impact them, either positively or negatively. With all that being said, let's jump straight into it, starting with the Ultramarines. So in all honesty, I think that Ultramarines are going to come through 9th edition pretty well. Their chapter tactic of being able to fall back and shoot is just so much more relevant now that fly units can't do that under normal circumstances. It's not enormously relevant against every single army, but it really does mean that the gun line is going to be reliable and it's going to be putting out a reasonable amount of firepower even if your opponent manages to lock you up. The leadership buff might be a little bit more relevant for Marines as well, as now even failing the morale test by 1 could allow you to lose a couple more casualties in a big squad, so having a little bit more insurance against that isn't a bad thing either. Their Scions of Guilliman doctrine may be not quite as relevant in the new edition though, due to a lot of vehicles being able to move and fire heavy weapons as if stationary anyway, thanks to that new big guns never tire special rule, which means that heavy weapons aren't going to suffer any penalty to this. It's going to be quite a niche ability this now, affecting things like aggressors shooting twice, and infantry with heavy weapons. Wouldn't be too surprised to see this change if there was a new Space Marine Codex in early 9th. In terms of unit changes, I think that Inceptors could actually be really interesting for Ultramarines now. They have gone down in points decently by comparison to other things, I think largely due to the change to the fly keyword, which means that they have an additional chance of being locked up, but in Ultramarines you'll still be able to hit if you fall back on force, meaning that they can still be pretty excellent and now very cheap skirmish troops. Tried and tested Ultramarines units such as Aggressors and Intercessors still look very usable, and one particular combo that interests me is the potential for Aggressors outflanking from Strategic Reserve. I believe rules as written you're going to be able to turn up from Strategic Reserve and use that Scions of Guilliman doctrine to double fire the aggressors, which means that you could pretty much guarantee them at least one round of getting 110 plus shots out of one unit of 6 of them if you so choose. Potentially very scary stuff there. Ultramarines are a little bit reliant on their characters, and they add a lot of buffs to the army, but I think this could be a little bit of a weakness going forward into the new edition. They're going to be easier to target and pick out if you do manage to blow away a unit that was guarding them, and also heroic intervention is just a little bit less powerful, as it allows the enemy units to attack the character before they get to attack them. Guilliman's also another interesting choice for the Ultramarines army. He's lost out a little bit on the command reroll changes. You can now no longer reroll if Guilliman's going to get up again after he's shot down the first time, but he is currently one of the only choices in the game that can fill out this new Supreme Command attachment, so he is far easier to get into an Ultramarines army without having to do something like a Supreme Command or Super Heavy Auxiliary. It'll be interesting to see how many points he costs in 9th. Overall, I think the Ultramarines are looking good for the new edition, and will probably be a slight buff to their performance. Next up we have White Scars, whose chapter tactic and doctrine aren't particularly changed going from 8th to 9th, though I will say that being able to advance and charge does look like it's going to be a bonus. With the changes to multi-charges, you're really not going to be wanting to multi-charge units unless you're very close to the enemy, and the White Scars can potentially get very close very quickly, say with units like Assault Marines or the new Primaris Bikes being able to advance and charge, so potentially charge them very close. In particular, their doctrine of getting +1 damage on all of their close combat weapons from turn 3 on will be excellent on some of the new Primaris units from Indomitors, particularly those Assault Intercessors, the Blade Guard Veterans, and also those splendid Outrider Bikes. Talking of which, I think they're going to be excellent in White Scars armies. They're very hard-hitting in close combat, unlike regular Space Marine bikes, which tended to have a bit of weird synergy between being able to get in combat really quickly with White Scars, but them actually being better at shooting. The White Scars have tons of special rules that synergize with bikers, such as stratagems and other abilities, and I think we could very easily see them riding into battle alongside Khans. Attack bikes are a bit more usable than they were before, but it does mean that the chapter tactic part of the White Scars, where they ignore the penalty for moving and shooting with heavy weapons, is kind of useless, so that bit has sort of become a thing that everyone gets, meaning that attack bikes aren't really particularly better in a White Scars army now. Overall though, I think the Outriders really have the potential to make White Scars into a far more threatening force and actually make use of their good bike synergies. Next we have the Raven Guard, who's always in cover chapter tactic. It's going to be interesting to see how that interacts with the new terrain rules. If it is still just going to be +1 to saves, then that could actually be really interesting on vehicle units, seeing as they can't usually get the light cover +1 to saves benefit in 9th edition anymore. It's going to make Raven Guard units a lot more attractive. The -1 to hit infantry and cover is maybe a little bit less useful in 9th, seeing as there will be other things that can grant that rule, such as the dense cover special rule from Woods, and also modifiers don't stack, so it means that if you're already -1 to hit, then your opponent may as well move and shoot with their heavy weapons at no penalty. In terms of their doctrine, I think it will be more useful, seeing as characters are going to be a little bit easier to pick out. If you can focus fire and eliminate an enemy unit that's guarding one particular character, leaving that character out in the open, you will be fine just to fire your conventional weapons on them. They don't have to be sniper weapons. Very good for eliminating problematic characters with the +1 to hit and wound that Raven Guard get. Sadly though, this won't double stack in terms of the +1 to wound roll on eliminators, which could get you mortal wounds very easily. But it does mean that eliminators might be a little bit more free to just take all 3 of their bolt sniper rifle shots, rather than fishing for extra mortal wounds. In terms of unit changes, Devastators are looking a fair bit cheaper due to the heavy weapon drops, and they're pretty solid units with Raven Guard getting -1 to hit at long range. Eliminators have taken a bit of a points bump, which wasn't too unexpected to be honest. I think they're still usable for Raven Guard, but maybe not as much of an auto-include as before. Also, it does look like Centurions have gone up significantly as well, meaning that the competitive list of Raven Guard deep striking Centurions maybe won't be quite as obnoxious as it could be previously. In the troops section, Infiltrators and Incursors are looking a fair bit more attractive compared with their counterparts. They didn't go up as much percentage-wise, and they certainly synergize well with Raven Guard's good board control thing that they have going on, and also their kind of Spec Ops vibe. Finally, from the new Indomitors box, I think that their Infiltrate stratagem to essentially deep strike units will be pretty excellent on some of the new close combat units to be able to deliver them into combat for a guaranteed charge, maybe in combination with a chaplain, and it could also be pretty handy to put a unit of Eradicators in deep strike reserve for just 1 command point. They are looking pretty scary with roasting vehicles. I think overall the changes have tended to hit some of the things that were strongest in Raven Guard, but maybe buffing a few of their other options as well, so different choices might be a bit more viable. Next we come to the Iron Hands, who chapter tactic wise have mainly suffered a small hit due to 5+ Overwatch being a bit less useful, particularly as we're only going to get it once per turn as a stratagem now. They might choose to make some changes to the chapter tactic in the Day 1 FAQ, but we'll have to wait and see. Their doctrine is now going to be particularly helpful for infantry with heavy weapons moving and shooting, although it won't be applicable to vehicles, as again they'll get that all the time now, and the vehicles will only benefit from the reroll 1s on first turn with heavy weapons. In terms of unit changes, Stalker Bolt Rifle Intercessors are still looking pretty good for Iron Hands. Vehicles in general seem to have been a bit buffed, either being able to move and shoot all game long again now, or shooting in close combat, or getting extra hits on certain units with blast weapons, and some vehicles have got cheaper as well, such as Storm Talon gunships with twin assault cannons and twin las cannons. Generally, if any vehicles got better, then the Iron Hands will be a good chapter to make use of it. However, some things have gone up in cost, including artillery, and also line of sight blocking terrain being more prevalent will make things a little bit harder for more gunline factions, as Iron Hands tend to be. One unit I forgot to mention on this list are Grav Devastators in a drop pod, who went down in points by quite a lot. They were already a really solid unit, and with that Gravitic Amplification stratagem, they really are getting close to being auto-includes in competitive lists, I think. So far it looks like their combo with a Chief Apothecary to get 5+ Feel No Pains and Iron Father Fire Resist 5+ Invul Save is looking fairly intact, so their Infantry Castle build doesn't look like it's going away immediately at least. We've also seen a few other new units that could be interesting, including that Primaris Tech Marine, who might be another solid option for filling out HQ slots and providing another cheap way to repair vehicles. Overall I think it is still looking fairly good for the Iron Hands, though perhaps a few of the vehicles and weapons that they were fielding before might be changed somewhat. Moving on, we have the Salamanders, who I think seem to be coming out of 9th edition fairly positively. As always, their additional damage increase from their chapter tactic is always pretty tempting, although you can replicate it with the Master Artisan's Successor Chapter tactic. I'm sorry, that was a bit of a typo there with the leadership thing. I think their doctrine of boosting flame weapons and melter weapons seem like it's going to be helpful. Heavy flamers are going to be able to fire in close combat on vehicles, meaning that you're not going to be able to just shot them up by charging them. And attack pikes and land speeders being able to move and fire with multi-melters for no penalty is also a really good thing for Salamanders. In terms of unit changes and new units, those Primaris Eradicators look like they could be a real asset to Salamanders. Finally, some Primaris Marines getting melter ones, and incredibly strong ones at that, is something that the Salamanders chapter tactic could really capitalise on. Getting +1 to wound with that already very solid anti-vehicle fire is no bad thing whatsoever. Melter guns and combi melters have got cheaper, as have flamers, again tying in with all of their existing synergies, and tactical marines with las cannons haven't increased in points whatsoever if you're taking small 5-man units with las cannons in, as these fit in pretty well with getting the maximum damage out of those rerolls. If the Storm Shield changes that we've seen on the Blade Guard veterans and some of the new characters is farmed out to Storm Shields in general, then I think that this has fairly good synergy with the Salamanders chapter tactic of ignoring AP-1, meaning that you're going to be catching quite a lot of saves on a 2+ save, and you'll still get your invul against higher AP stuff. Finally, again, I think strategic reserves could be really helpful for actually delivering some of the durable and powerful Salamanders units to get close to the enemy. Salamanders always seem to have been an army that have decent raw strength, but are often a little bit slow and struggle to bring it to bear quickly. If you can have things jumping in from the sides or flank with melters and flamers, particularly flamer weapons with Successor Chapters for the plus 3-inch range from long-range marksmen, then that could be a very solid way of dealing some scary damage. It looks like on the whole that 9th edition is going to bear pretty well for the Salamanders. For the Imperial Fists, however, I think it might be a bit of a different story. There's really not a lot of good news from the changes in my opinion. The Imperial Fist chapter tactic is a bit of a question mark whether it will ignore the effects of all cover or just ignoring the +1 to saves from the light cover benefits, which I would guess on the whole is probably the more likely of the two. We'll have to wait for an FAQ for that one, but I think that the Crimson Fist one of getting extra ballistic skill against big units will be a little bit less relevant, just because hordes are so penalised by the blast special rules and also the changes to unit coherency and engagement range that I just don't see as many people running hordes these days. Their doctrine I think does remain strong even if it is only on first turn however. I think vehicles are going to be very prevalent in 9th edition, and I think that there will be more fortifications than before as it's quite easy to include them in the army now. In terms of unit changes, quite a few of the Imperial Fist's iconic units have gone up in cost. Heavy bolters have jumped from 10 to 15 points as have hurricane bolters, and Thunderfire cannons and whirlwinds have both seen around about 50% points increases. The artillery has certainly gained some special rules, such as getting blast and becoming more relevant due to more line of sight blocking terrain, but still a 50% increase is pretty enormous. Stalker bolter intercessors still seem pretty decent though, and a fair few of the heavy weapons for infantry have dropped in points cost, such as missile launchers and las cannons, meaning that we might be seeing a few more classic Imperial Fist Devastator squads on the go. Moving and shooting with vehicles and dreadnoughts is also a decent buff as well, as they're quite often common components of Imperial Fist gun lines, so for me a little bit of a mixed bag there. I think we will have to wait for the ignoring cover FAQ to see exactly what that means. If it is everything then it could be really powerful, if it's just light cover then it's a bit underwhelming. On the whole though it's not looking quite as good for the Imperial and Crimson Fists as it is for some other chapters I feel. Moving on to the Black Templars. Their chapter tactic is excellent for getting into close combat, particularly now with the Overwatch and multi-charge changes. You now need to be able to reach every single unit that you declare in a multi-charge, so more reliable charge distance is pretty good if you do want to try and stretch to more units. Their unique doctrine is better on low strength units such as Assault Intercessors, so that has some good synergy with the new Indomitors box, and could certainly help with the Blade Guard veterans, characters, and maybe even those Outriders if you fancied. The 3 main flavours of Land Raider have certainly got better. They're able to shoot in close combat now, which helps to prevent them being completely useless if you do happen to get them locked up, and also compared with other things they haven't really raised in points cost all that much at all, so I think they're comparatively buffed. The Judiciars from the Indomitors box could be interesting to include alongside some Assault Intercessors or something. Making the enemy countercharges fight last is a pretty powerful ability, and they also function almost like mini Emperor's Champions with very similar stat lines. It could be pretty fun to have a fair few crazy Blade Masters on the go in a Black Templars list. Finally, with that new stratagem that allows units to fall back even if they're completely surrounded, the Black Templar stratagem to lock an enemy infantry unit in close combat is looking better than ever. Being able to guarantee remaining in melee is really quite a powerful thing for a close combat focused army. Overall, I do feel that Black Templars' doctrine and chapter tactic maybe aren't quite as strong as things like Blood Angels or Space Wolves, but I think that on the whole now this is probably going to make it easier for these sort of melee armies. Moving on now, we have the Dark Angels, where I feel that their chapter tactic might be a little bit less useful in 9th. Now vehicles can move and shoot with heavy weapons with no penalty whatsoever. Remaining stationary is just a little bit less attractive than before as you're giving up good movement. I think it'll often just make more sense to move and get the better positioning rather than staying still and gaining the extra reroll 1s. Their combat doctrine for extra range first turn really isn't a bad thing. Particularly now a lot of games are going to be played on smaller tables, it means that a lot of weapons could be in range of basically the entire enemy's backfield right from turn 1, and it could be very hard to hide from the Unforgiven. On the Assault Intercessors datasheet we've seen that plasma weapons are now likely to be written with only unmodified ones overcharging and killing the bearer, which I think is pretty helpful news for things like Black Knights or Plasma Inceptors that Dark Angels can make great use of with weapons of the Dark Age. and in addition to this, Plasma Inceptors got way cheaper than before. Hellblasters didn't go up in points cost at all, so are comparatively buffed as well, and Plasma Cannons and Inceptors also gained the Blast special rule, which again will really amp up their firepower against any unit with 6 or more. In general, I think that Plasma is looking pretty solid for the Dark Angels at the moment. The vehicle changes to moving and shooting is pretty excellent for Ravenwing Land Speeders and Talon Masters, as well as attack bikes and Dark Talons as well. It's going to be pretty intriguing to see if Blade Guard veterans really gain all that much by getting the Deathwing keyword, which it does look like they're going to be able to. Finally, again, as with the White Scars, the Primaris Outriders are going to be a godsend to the Ravenwing. They've just got so many stratagems and options for making them more interesting, particularly with the addition of Ritual of the Damned. Getting these guys with maybe -1 to hit from a Dark Shroud, plus a 4+ invul save from their Jinx special rule, and then maybe using other stratagems from the Ravenwing attack squadron to make them more deadly. Just seems like it's going to be an all-around winning scenario, and between feasible shooting and very strong assault, I certainly think they'll be making appearances in Ravenwing lists. They'll certainly be harder to kill than Ravenwing Black Knights. Moving on to the Sons of Russ. Overall, as an army, I think it will just depend on how well Melee is doing in 9th edition once all the rules have been shaken out. I'm tentatively thinking that it is going to be mildly stronger, although there are some significant negatives, such as more difficult multi-charges. Heroic Intervention, as we mentioned before, is just that little bit weaker than it was. If you do a 6-inch Heroic Intervention with a character, then you do need to be prepared for the enemy unit to strike first and hit that character before you get to attack. In terms of changes to some units, the heavy weapon points cost drops will certainly be appreciated by the Longfangs, with access to their 1 command point stratagem to make some nice rerolls happen, are arguably some of the best Devastators in the game. The addition of Assault Intercessors and Blade Guard in Impulsors could be really handy for a Space Wolves list, particularly accompanying the all-new Ragnar Blackmane. And I'm really hoping that the Assault Intercessor Sergeants are able to take Thunderhammers when we see a full datasheet for them, which as we know have excellent synergy with the Space Wolves Hunters Unleashed chapter tactic. Fighty walkers such as Dreadnoughts also seem decently improved, being able to move and shoot with heavy weapons, being able to fire those heavy weapons in close combat, and also not really wanting to multi-charge as much while ignoring Overwatch. Just seems like all-round overall wins for Dreadnoughts this edition. Not bad for a chapter that has more access to melee Dreadnoughts than virtually any other. Strategic Reserves could also be an interesting option for outflanking Thunderwolves now, which before they couldn't do because they weren't infantry. More line of sight blocking terrain will certainly help hide melee units as they move up the board. Or maybe even just getting -1 to hits from dense cover is certainly a negative to shooting lists and a buff to melee ones. Although the character targeting rules again could be problematic for Space Wolves, as they do tend to fill quite a lot of special characters. Positioning will have to be thought of a little bit more. It's a fairly similar story to my mind with the Blood Angels. Again, I think that melee is in general going to be a little bit stronger. I think Blood Angels in particular will really enjoy the no Overwatch unless you have a special rule to make it happen, as it could be a really serious threat to things like Death Company when they were charging in. Possibly above the Space Wolves, the Blood Angels have some excellent options for getting into close combat, such as moving Death Company before the game, or jumping them across the board with On Wings of Fire, and that +1 to charge they get from Red Thirst really means that they'll have more chance of making slightly longer charges, and this will allow them to do multi-charges a bit easier. Their +1 to wound is also excellent with things like Assault Intercessors, Blade Guard, and those Outriders, who will be even more general purpose units with this up, particularly in combination with Astartes Chainswords and the Assault Doctrine. Assault Intercessors and Outriders getting AP -2 on the charge, with an additional attack if you're Blood Angels as well. It'd be very nice if Assault Intercessors could be made into Death Company Assault Intercessors, though I do suspect that we might have to wait for a new codex to be able to access that if it's going to happen. They just seem in general a lot more suited to it than the standard ones with bolters. Incursors, I think, are another unit that look quite good for the Blood Angels as well. They're now only 1 point more than Intercessors, and the ability to make first turn charges with those paired combat blades amping up their close combat looks pretty scary, at least on paper. Again, with getting into combat, being able to access a 3d6-inch charge from reserve really does mean that you might be able to just declare every unit within 12 inches, at least in certain circumstances, and still have your Death Company or Sanguinary Guard rinse through a whole bunch of enemy units. Again, with Space Wolves, having more line of sight blocking terrain or dense cover on the table will be handy, and it looks like artillery costs are increasing across the board. And it's looking like the new missions are really quite good at forcing people into the centre of the board to take and hold objectives in the first few turns, which again is going to punish enemy units that want to sit back and maybe outrange the Blood Angels and shoot them down, while the Blood Angels can maybe control the centre of the board for the majority of the game, or make your opponent have to advance and then suffer a charge. Overall, I think the Blood Angels are looking pretty solid. Next we come to the Deathwatch, who to be honest I think we're still waiting on some important details for how they're going to be functioning in 9th. Special issue ammo is always excellent, particularly combined with the new combat doctrines which they've only gained recently, which I do think has made them into an actually very scary army shooting wise, particularly for units like Intercessors with auto bolt rifles. Enough special issue ammunition will pretty helpfully deal with virtually any enemy infantry in the game. The command points and CP changes are particularly handy for Deathwatch, seeing as they can make a functional army in just one battalion, rarely needing to go too far outside this. I think their mission tactics maybe might take a small hit, seeing as 9th edition might have a little bit less spam of any one detachment slot, seeing as you want to be minimising detachments, and it rewards people for filling out all the detachment slots. But intriguingly enough, that might not be the biggest deal, as they have said that Deathwatch are going to be able to access all miniatures from the Indomitors set. Now, a whole flurry of new options being added to the Deathwatch is certainly no bad thing whatsoever, in whatever form they come. But interestingly, the Indomitors set does include a Lieutenant and an Ancient, neither of which the Deathwatch have had access to so far. Getting some reliable reroll 1s to wound would likely be something that a lot of Deathwatch players would like to take up. Even if for whatever reason they don't get the Lieutenants or the Ancients, then the Eradicators will certainly be a decent addition. Point for point, they look like crazily good anti-tank, and that's something that Deathwatch are really missing at the moment, efficient anti-tank on an infantry platform. Changes to heavy weapons such as las cannons on infantry might help with that as well. For small elite units, I think the new cover rules will be particularly easy to use, either getting -1 to hit from woods, or being able to use defensible ruins, or hiding out of line of sight if needed. Smaller board sizes are very good for close range, high intensity firepower like the Deathwatch. And with a Xenos army in Necrons being the new main big baddies of 9th edition, it's safe to say that a lot more of these armies will be hitting the table, and that's usually going to be a good thing for Deathwatch. Having a lot of infantry targets in the Necrons are generally quite good for special issue ammunition, plus they also have that unique stratagem for helping deal with reanimation protocols. Games Workshop have said that Deathwatch are due for an update fairly early in 9th, whether that means a whole codex or just a very big FAQ. I'm really hoping that they might go the whole hog and even add in some new Phobos units and maybe allow them access to the Impulsor, both of which seem like strange oversights to me. If they do get a new codex, then having the Watchmaster's rerolls fixed to take account of modifiers will be good as well, just to bring them up to speed with other chapter masters. Overall though, I think the Deathwatch are really looking good in 9th edition, and depending on how many points they're going to cost, I think they are shaping up to be really strong indeed. Next we come to the Grey Knights, who I think do share quite a lot of similarities with Deathwatch, in being small elite armies that can make good use of cover, and with short range shooting and melee are going to have increased value on smaller board sizes. In general, the Psychic phase hasn't taken too many changes in 9th, but now you can't fall back and cast Psychic powers, so that's a minor nerf I guess. Plus I feel like a lot of people without Psykers will take that new Abhor the Witch secondary objective, which will be very easy to max when against Grey Knights, as you just need to kill Psykers for them, and their entire army are Psykers. Their ties to the warp ability are still very strong, and you can now take Assassins or Ephrail Stern alongside them as well, and not break detachment specific abilities, so it's nice to gain a few more options that you can viably use. In terms of unit changes, it looks like the Stormbolters going up from 2 points to 3 points, though of course it remains to be seen what the actual Grey Knight units will change. Similar to the Space Wolves, it's looking like Dread Knights and Dreadnoughts are going to be stronger this edition, moving and shooting with no penalty to heavy weapons, and being able to shoot in close combat, and also engage units in first floor ruins. It also looks like the Paladin style will remain pretty intact, unless they take any major rebalancing options. Paladins can get very tough and very fighty from just stacking numerous different defensive and offensive buffs, rather than necessarily going for any crazy -1 to hit stacking buff that's now undoable. Overall, I think the Grey Knights are still looking to be in a pretty decent spot in 9th edition. Hopefully some of the changes might help to bring back some of their Dreadnoughts and Land Raider units into the game a bit more, rather than the better lists near exclusively using Paladin Death Stars. Finally, I thought we'd round up just by talking through a few of the Successor Chapters. Master Artisans for rerolls is still great, although I wouldn't be surprised that it might get rewritten if they do come out with a new Space Marine Codex sometime soon. The Stealthy trait also seems excellent for getting +1 to saves if it does remain exactly that same way, particularly on vehicles as we said, as they can't get light colour +1 to saves anywhere in 9th now. Hungry for Battle seems a little bit stronger than before with a +1 to charges as well, allowing for better multi-charges as we said, and Whirlwind of Rage for extra hits on 6s will certainly be good with all of those new Primaris units, as well as if this edition does turn out to be a bit more of a melee-centric one in general. Long Range Marksman is going to be good with strategic reserves to get Flamers in flaming range straight out of reserve, which could be particularly nice for the Salamanders chapter as we said. Unfortunately, I think the Flesh Tearers really haven't caught up with Blood Angels at all, going from 8th to 9th, as I'd argue that +1 to charges from their Blood Angels Red Thirst is even more important than it ever was, and I think it still outweighs the Flesh Tearers' extra damage output. We know that Forge World units are going to be getting some attention soon. It's possible that it might come out with some chapter tactics for the individual chapters, but that might limit the availability of options that we have right now. There are also a ton of Forge World characters that have been in the indexes and never had original models of their own, which might see us having quite a lot of those units move to Warhammer Legends. Still though, although I think we might lose a fair few things, having access to different and interesting options, particularly for chapter tactics, could be a really good buff to Space Marines in general. Finally, Blood Ravens with their Set in Stone chapter tactics have those rerolls in the psychic phase, which could be a pretty powerful one when combined with command rerolls to have more reliable casting than most. In general though, I still think that their combination of chapter tactics is pretty weak comparatively. So I hope you enjoyed that brief spin through the various different Space Marine chapters and some thoughts on how they'll do in 9th. As I said, please let me know if you have any other thoughts on any specific niche things for any of the chapters down in the comments below. There's a whole load of information and changes to process, so if you can spot anything that's going to be extra good or really going to hit a good combo, it'd be good to have a read of what you can think. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where we'll be certainly covering Space Marines in the new edition, including any new units and the points changes as and when they come out. If you have been finding these videos useful at all, I'd just like to mention that the channel does have a Patreon page, which you can see down in the video description below. If you have enjoyed, then any support is greatly appreciated. It is what allows me to keep on making these videos. Channel Patrons get to see one video early a week, they get to vote in regular polls on what sort of things come next on the channel, and there's also entry to the Auspex Tactics giveaway, such as the one for the Indomitors box that's coming this month. If any of that sounds good, or you'd just like to help me keep on making these videos, then feel free to have a look down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.